Welcome everyone to this session on global technology competitiveness, a strategic imperative. I would like to start by thanking Abhishek ji for his address, insightful address, and which also sets the context for this session, which is going to talk about the technology competitiveness. We have His Excellency Alex Ellis, UK High Commissioner to India. We have Ms. Nivedita Mehra, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum's Managing Director. She leads the operations of the forum in India. We have Ms. Vibe, who is the Managing Director for the Indo-Bavarian Center in India. And she also leads the center's collaboration between academia and industry. And of course, we have Abhishek ji, who set the tone. So I would like to open with a broad question as to how tech now has become the center stage for most policy discussion internationally and nationally. So I would pose this question to Ms. Mehra first. In your experience, how has this move from conversations being shaped by technology? So yeah, please, if you could. Yeah.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here in Bangalore, which is really the throbbing heart of technology in India. So really happy to be here with all of you today. I think we just witnessed Xi Jinping address the business community in San Francisco. And not to be provocative, but I think whatever the trusted partners are doing towards technology convergence has done enough to make some countries uncomfortable. And I think it's the right direction that we've moved in terms of defining how technology collaboration across the world should work. Just a word about the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. We represent over 400 companies, both American, Indian, and others who are, again, in the trusted partnership chain, who invest both in India, US, and across the globe. We're a trusted partner of both governments, a key interlocutor, and our sort of role really becomes important because yes, business eminence is critical to this relationship, but we also apply the lens of greater good and initiatives that immediately don't have business interest, but are still important for the greater good of both countries. And therefore, the technology conversation, the conversation around regulation of technology becomes extremely important to the strategic nature of the relationship that we're engaged with. Coming back to your question, I think if we take a step back, post-COVID, what we've all seen is rapid digitization, and as Abhishek ji has just outlined, the steps that India has taken have been extremely rapid. Congratulations on the DPI and the G20 announcements. I think that's tremendous progress and something that everybody is looking forward to partnering with. Where we are looking at it from a US-India point of view, we've seen very quickly the initiative on critical and emerging tech being the defining piece of the relationship. So the entire US-India relationship now has been framed around what we're calling an initiative on critical and emerging tech. I bring this up right up front because any of us who've watched this relationship for a long period have seen it go through many iterations where first it was just a commercial and trade relationship. Then it evolved to defense sales. And now we're actually talking about co-innovating, co-production, co-collaboration, and much deeper areas where we're going to do much more for the future together. And I think that's very important to highlight. I think the second piece, which is very important and linked to all of this, and we see it in our daily work, is global value chains. What COVID did was, yes, make countries realize that the critical supply chains have to be moved to their home countries, but also then identify long-term partners and trusted partners. And I go on using the word trusted because I think it's very important for the conversation today. And we are seeing that shift happening specifically to countries like India. And I think that's a very important opportunity that we can delve into further. So I'll stop there for the opening and then come back to more questions. Thank you.
No, I think that's really important. I would like to bring in High Commissioner Alex here. So we recently saw the UK AI Summit happening. If you'd like to add up to this, how this technology now is shaping conversations for most of these global forums where we see leaders also participating and talking about the tech competitiveness.
Sure. It's lovely to be here, the throbbing heart of clean air in India, as well as everything else. So I'm delighted to come south for that, as well as for this event. Just going back, just picking up what you were saying about why is technology so important? Well, I guess technology is just more dominant in our lives as I touch the screen, just more fundamental. Secondly, we had a demonstration of the importance of that in COVID, as you were saying, and I would say, dare I say, the Covishield vaccine is a rather good example of trusted technology, that's to say, developed in a university in the United Kingdom, grown by a British company, and then really mass-produced in vast scale by an Indian company. But that's a kind of classic example of trust and the importance of science essentially leading to trust. And we'll come back to trust, I'm sure, because I think it's fundamental. And also at the same time, you have a much more contested and competitive world, where essentially, in the case of the rise of China, it's an extraordinary thing, and China was at the AI summit. You have to work with China, but at the same time, you can't kid yourselves, the Chinese state's view of the world is just very different to the Indian state's view of the world, or the German state's view of the world, or the United Kingdom state's view of the world. And so you are finding that technology is a sort of frontier of trust and of competition, in a way which is very different to how it was happening in the middle of the 1990s. Maybe not so different from what was happening between, say, 1935 and 1945. And into that, people like me start appearing. And I hope we'll get back to the question of trust and understanding, because one of the big issues you have here is the understanding of the things we're talking about. And when people don't understand what they're being told, they instinctively don't trust it. Anthropologists can explain this far better than me. And that's a big problem in this area, I think. But when they see the benefits, as you were describing, Abhishek, then I think they value it and they want to support it. So it is part of international relations, and it's part of international relations because it's so fundamental to what's happening inside our societies. And the truth is, we ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, you think it's like this now, just wait for 10 or 20 years' time. And so I think that lots of different countries and leaders are trying to get ahead of that. Now, they see some political advantage to that, I think. They see some commercial advantage to that. But they also see it as a necessity. And I think that's why our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and by the way, although in the last session somebody was referring to the white man, I'd like to point out that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is not, whilst being as British as I am, nor indeed is the person who runs our team in Bangalore, who is also as British as I am. So hopefully that concept is fading a little bit in imagination. And I think that you are going to have to do this. You can't do this on your own. Even a country as big as India can't do it on its own. And at the same time, you have this unbelievable levels of competition between countries. So how do you manage that? How do you bring countries to discuss AI, just for example, as we were talking about, done in different ways? And that requires cooperation to manage competition. And that includes with that's not easy with China, or the United States and China are the sort of forefront of that. But I think it's true for most countries. So that's why I think that our Prime Minister is so interested in this, and why he was keen to try and get different countries from around the world to address the problem. And we also need to do that finally because of speed. The speed at which these things are changing, even compared 15 or 20 years ago, is absolutely astonishing. You see the graphs, the use of the digital payments infrastructure in India. And you realize that you kind of have to move early and cooperate early, because otherwise, frankly, events just overtake you. But now, for better or for worse, I think states are now quite heavily involved in these areas, because there's a lot of politics in it, as well as competition, as well as opportunity. And so we have to cooperate across states. That is inevitable in the future in part of diplomacy.
Thank you, High Commissioner. No, I think that's a very important remark that you made, that no country can do it alone, and there's a need for global cooperation. So I'd like to add another question and follow up with Ms. Wibke as to how countries balance their national interest and also look at global cooperation. And if you'd like to add an opening remark and then follow up this question.
Okay, yeah, sure. Maybe I just add a few words before also kind of on our like on my organization and where we are actually coming from. So we are funded by the Bavarian Ministry of Science and the Arts, to especially connect with India and to, not only kind of build the bridges, of course, between our state and India, but also like we're having a huge focus on building the bridges to the industry or between industry and academia, because I mean, I think we've seen that also already now in the previous speeches, that this is also something that's a huge driving factor for technological innovation, like in the future, is kind of how are we able to do this, or to transfer the innovation that's happening at our universities. And I mean, thank you very much also for inviting me to that panel here, because I think also the approach that you're trying to do over here is to, again, bring together policymakers and the development or the technological side and the scientific side, I think, is a very, very important approach. So just, coming back to your question, for us, definitely, I mean, this whole topic has always been like a global one. I don't think we can think this technological developments really in a, in an isolated setting. Because I mean, it basically reaches everyone, and just when we are looking at really the speed of developments that we're having, it's amazing kind of to catch up, to kind of to keep up, and kind of probably looking at a German perspective, just where we are located from the geographical point of view. There is no way that we can think these kind of technological developments without context to our partners, right? For us, actually, this also comes down to quite a crucial question of security, right? Again, I mean, we're then also turning to a point of trust and so on. And I was actually pretty amazed to see besides all those conflicts that we are currently having, and definitely there are quite things in place that are quite a threat for us, again, looking at Germany's geographical location, to see this kind of unified approach, or how far actually they've come in Bletchley Park and in the discussions they had there, that although we're having, our conflicts probably on geographical or whatever sides, still when it comes to technology, there's also an understanding that we need to work together, because we're just not isolated anymore, no?
Right. No, thank you for your statement. I think I'd now invite Abhishek ji to just speak upon the balance of national interests, as you spoke about India's various initiatives for leveraging technology competitiveness. If you'd like to add, please.
See, like, as I already mentioned, and we always say that in the tech world, it's been a cliche for a long time, that we are living in a global village and we are more interconnected in many ways than one. And whatever happens anywhere in the world impacts all of us. But when we look at technology per se, or when we look at, say, for example, a phone or an iPad or a laptop, even making it requires getting components from multiple countries, bringing together. And when we look at developing solutions, there is a lot to learn from almost every other country that we have. Like, we talk about our digital transformation projects, I mentioned about that, but there's so much that we have learned from a country like Estonia, for example. Their X-Roads project and the way they leverage technology, and it's probably one of the most connected countries wherein they have used. Of course, we can say that it's a small country and it's easy to do, but still there is so much that we have picked up from the X-Roads project in building our own API Setu project and trying to build interconnected systems. We have learned things from the UK, we have learned things from the US, and all our compute infrastructure, for example, all of it comes from where? It comes from the US. And when we are building AI systems, when we are building AI compute infrastructure, today NVIDIA only has the chips that can provide us the chips with which we can build our AI compute infrastructure. So the dependence is there. The big tech, most of it is concentrated in the West, US and Europe. So we need to, so if we have to ensure that our researchers are able to develop their algorithms with the skill sets that they have and the data that they have, they will have dependencies on the compute systems that they have. So this is something that is given, and we need to work in such a way that while we keep national priorities at core, but the effort that is required in building research networks across the world. It has worked in several fields, like the CERN example has been there for research in particle physics and all, which all global researchers come together and work. So similar approaches have to be taken up, and that's what we keep on doing in the bilaterals that we have with the UK or the US or the Germany or the European Union. So we work very closely with the global community in developing these solutions. We learn about it. Even in the G20, one of the biggest achievements of the G20 was to come up with a definition of digital public infrastructure, to which all the G20 countries, including China, agreed. And another decision there was that we will build up a global digital public infrastructure repository. Like DPIs doesn't mean only India stack. DPI doesn't mean only our solutions. Almost every country has built some solutions which classify to be a digital public infrastructure. So one of the outcomes of the G20 is that we'll be building up a global DPI repository, and India would be like leading the effort, but we're working closely with all the G20 member countries. And the DPI.global portal that we are building, we have already got almost 45 DPIs, 45 projects from 14 countries which are become part of that. So that also brings in the global collaboration, and when we offer this global repository to the rest of the world, so the countries across the world will have the option of looking into the pros and cons, which product suits their requirement to the best, which is the most easily customizable, and then they can pick that. So that also brings in the entire, the need for global cooperation on the DPI story. And the other G20 announcement, or the declaration, was also about the One Future Alliance. The One Future Alliance also talks about how different countries and different stakeholders, multilateral bodies, can come together and create a kind of a fund that will help us in building these DPIs in the countries across the world. So of course, how it will be operationalized, that discussions are going on currently with all the G20 countries about, and the other stakeholders like the World Bank and the UN, about how the One Future Alliance will build up. But then again, it also brings us to the point that it is going to be a whole of world approach and not a single country's approach when we try to take the DPI story across the world. So national priority is very important, but there is a lot to learn from the world in order to take these solutions further.
Thank you. No, I think I like the mention of dependency here. I'd like to move to Ms. Mehra. With respect to, say, semiconductor also, we've seen this global chain, and there is a lot of dependency. So if you'd like to add from the US's perspective, yeah.
Sure, absolutely. I think from the US perspective, if we look at history, we've always seen the commercial or the industry piece lead the relationship, right? And now we are at a stage where we are actually seeing the governments being fairly involved in how to give a fillip to ensure that there is collaboration in areas where there can be a win-win situation for both countries as well as for all our partners. And I think that's the change and the shift that we are right in the heart of. If you see some of the collaborations that they've announced, again, the funding piece is not very large, but the fact that both governments are keenly involved, they are setting frameworks to allow for that collaboration to happen, and then pushing industry in that direction. Oftentimes industry, unless it doesn't see immediate profit, will be happy to sit back and say, look, the CHIPS Act is giving me enough money in the US. Why do I need to explore other markets? But I think the fact that the governments have agreed at the national security level, at the national security advisor level, there's agreement at the top that these are important partnerships and supply chains to be built. If I look at the kind of arrangements that are now in place, you look at the Quad, it's the same thing. There are different capabilities across the 4 countries, and they are being leveraged. India, Australia, US, 3 ways we had never actually explored what are some of the commonalities, right? But those are coming to the fore now. So I think where we are seeing the collaboration is really the government leading and setting up frameworks, but then pushing the private sector to take it to the next level. So that's where we're seeing a lot of action.
Right. No, thank you. I think I'd also again bring Abhishek ji here, if you'd like to maybe focus on how India's semiconductor mission is also sort of looking at making technology a strategic imperative?
See, like when it comes to semiconductors, of course, we know that the technology around semiconductors is confined to a few countries and a few corporations, if I can say the word. But India is a huge consumer of electronics, and we need semiconductors in almost every product that we build, whether it's automobiles or health equipment or electronics that we use. So we do need to kind of acquire self-sufficiency in building this. So we have a program, the government has approved a program under which we are giving incentives to companies to come and establish shop here and help incubate the semiconductor ecosystem. We already have Micron setting up the plant in Gujarat, where the manufacturing will start next year. The work has already started, and the government has been very liberal in trying to provide incentives so that we bring the best of the technology from the world over to India, and that will help us incubate. And maybe in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll have Indian companies who will acquire the capabilities of doing that. We are very strong when it comes to design, especially in chip design. Our companies and our engineers are amongst the world's best. But what we do need is the ability to manufacture, and some of the machines that are required for semiconductor manufacturing will again come from maybe Germany and Taiwan and other countries. So we need to work with the global community in trying to do that. And when we are doing that, we also realize that we are competing with the global community there also. Like every country, whether it's Europe or whether it's the United States, they are also trying to set up their semiconductor manufacturing plants, and there can be as many plants that can be set up. So we do work in the global ecosystem. There are opportunities, there are challenges, but many of the big tech companies also look at the potential that India has as not only a market but as a source for technical manpower who has helped design many of the solutions that are being world used globally. So using our talent, strength of talent that we have, and using the opportunity of a market that we have, and using the proactive policy direction that we have from the government of India and the state government for setting up the semiconductor manufacturing and electronics manufacturing ecosystem, we hope that we'll be able to move forward in this direction.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. I think I'd like to invite High Commissioner here and also add another layer of question to understand how countries should ready themselves with the right instrument and strategies to be ready for these tech advancements which are happening in various technologies.
Well, you've got to grow your internal capability, first of all, and represent a country which has pretty strong internal capabilities, especially on the research side and on the systems design side. So you've got to do that. You have got to work out who your friends are, who you can really trust. And trust isn't 100 and 0. What degree of trust can you place? There's always a certain negotiation around that. And then you have to create effective partnerships to deliver those outcomes. Most of the time, this doesn't have to have the state involved, putting it bluntly. The state can quite often get in the way of effective partnerships, and that's rule number 1, do no harm. So you have to allow the flow of goods and ideas and people and capital between different countries. That's why a free trade agreement between the UK and India would be rather good. I thought I'd just slip that in there as but you then have to, I think why does the state get involved? It's mainly, I think, really from the security side. That's where the first push comes from, the security side. And you see the security vulnerabilities which are created through technology. And then you have to create partnerships which increase that trust, because with the increased trust comes the increased sharing of technology and data. And that doesn't happen automatically. I agree with you. It's not organic. You actually need to create those relationships, those partnerships over time. It doesn't happen in a day either. And that enables you to start to share more and more of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And from that, I think, then becomes the ability to have kind of much deeper collaborations. And they may be industrial, they may be in research and so forth. So that's exactly what the United States and India have done. It's what the United Kingdom and India, I expect, will do in the next few months, actually, is to create a deeper partnership covering really the areas which Professor Sood was talking about at the start of the discussion. But if you aim too high, one of my advices to people from outside India coming to India, don't aim for the moon. Because it's a complex country, you have to find a starting point where you can start the interaction, and then you develop it from there. And you also have to be capable of respecting each other's societal choices, because they differ. No society is the same in terms of its preference, for example, about what it allows for data sharing. What the United States does, for example, on data sharing is not the way the United Kingdom would do it or the way that Germany would do it. Interestingly, Germany and the UK are really quite different in their societal choices on how, because of our history, essentially, we trust our security services in a way which Germany doesn't, particularly if you've come from Eastern Germany. You just have a different preference. So you have to respect those differences in societal choices. But at the same time, you must create those partnerships. And that's what I think all of the countries here are trying to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I think here I'd like to bring in another question, and maybe Ms. Wibke could start. Which is that, what are the key technologies, according to you in your experience, which are leading the next 10 years of technology advancements? And if you'd like to maybe highlight India-German relationship.
Okay, sure. I mean, again, then looking at, or like kind of looking from my perspective, it's probably just like a portion of Germany that we're looking at, but then it's definitely one of the most innovative locations that we're having. And if all over the state, and then again, looking also just at as the state of Bavaria, kind of the GDP that we're having compared to a few other European countries is even higher. So so definitely kind of our location is one of the driving factors when it comes to the technology innovation. So just for the strategies that we are having in place there, definitely there's a huge focus on artificial intelligence. There's definitely huge focus and also quite a number of investment programs in place when it comes to quantum technology. I mean, of course, we also have, and we are just coming from the topic of semiconductors and so on. We are also having those programs in place where we are, trying to build these kind of industries again in our localities, as we've seen it all over the world. But at the same time, I think also the awareness is very, very clear that we will not be able to do all of what's required on our own, right? And we can see like a huge push in our industry that they're trying to diversify their supply chains and really actually looking forward also on what's happening in India and what's happening on the missions that they set up here. But yeah, again, looking on the technology side, really there are quite a number of initiatives in place. As I said, focusing on AI, and again, as High Commissioner also said, here we are really, facing local challenges due to kind of our history and due to where we're coming from, and it's actually pretty exciting to see, or to see kind of what are the different focuses when it comes to those security questions that are being connected to it, and to see how different the approaches are, and really kind of the developments that have been happening here in India, and how far you have moved in providing just kind of the very basic service digitally. In some fields, we are actually quite far away from it, just because of our our local challenges that we are having. So I'm actually really looking forward, when it comes to these technology developments. The other thing I mentioned, when it comes to quantum computing, and Professor Rangaswamy was mentioning it in the panel earlier. Also the challenges connected to it when it comes to sustainability. and how to create a very sustainable technology growth. I think this is actually one of the major challenges that we are that we are sometimes, forgetting to look at while talking about all this tech developments. Is like, how can we make them more sustainable, more, and again also, basically save our environment and kind of our planet, which is the only source that we're having, right? So, kind of bring that connect in, how, kind of not to forget about it, forget this, this element when we're talking about technological development.
Thank you. No, I think, thanks for the comprehensive account. I think we also have an open session after this, so I'll just take quick, maybe 1 minute, 2 minute closing remarks from all of you. But maybe the focus could be here, what is the next decade of technology or charting technology competitiveness look like? And we have representatives, we'd take Abhishek Singh ji first, and maybe you could focus on the GPI and how India look forward to taking technology forward with this.
Like, as I mentioned earlier also, like when we look at the world of technology, it's all about collaboration and working in partnerships with countries which are aligned to the larger global consensus on the future of technology, like in what ways we should use it. And most countries across the world are aligned on this direction, that we have a huge opportunity to create value for people across the world. So that's what the world has come across, and then how to prevent any misuse of technology. There are numerous examples, whether it was for the climate change or whether it's for the atomic energy, nuclear regulations. The world has come across to solve those challenges and also bring in consensus with regard to how we move forward. Similarly, AI, the Global Partnership on AI is an initiative which works on the OECD 2019 principles of AI, and the member countries are working together along with experts and stakeholders. Because this is also not only a government issue. So the governments are there in the GPA, as also experts and scientists and researchers are also part of the GPA ecosystem. So together they are working around to bring on a consensus with regard to the way forward for ensuring continuing research and innovation in the field of AI, as also building guardrails and regulations to prevent any misuse or harm from AI. So that's how it's happening in the field of AI. And as we move forward, as more technologies come in, because this is just like a point of time that we are. In the next 10 years, we'll be talking of more intrusive or more powerful technologies which will try to compete, wherein machines will try to compete with humans. So when that era comes in, that will also require a collaborative, participatory approach of building consensus with regard to handling those issues. So this is what I feel lies ahead for all of us.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. High Commissioner, if you could highlight.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's try three things. First of all, I think you'll see much more of the benefits of technology, for example, in healthcare. I think that is going to be very, very exciting indeed, in the personalization of healthcare. So that's a great thing. Secondly, one thing, unfortunately, which won't change, which is the intensity of competition, essentially, putting it bluntly, between China and the United States, the most symbolically powerful country, but other countries as well. And that won't change. So thirdly, how are you going to deal with what Abhishek's just been talking about, which is the need for global approaches to the misuse of AI, for example. And the way the AI summit of the other day, which we had in the UK, but it's also true of GPA as well, these are all attempts to see, can you bring all the countries in the world together to deal with the risks which are inherent in these new technologies? And that is the great challenge for diplomats, but for all of us, I think, is whether you can get the opportunities, manage the competition, but in a way which doesn't lead to increased harm from technology for all of us.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Ms. Mehra, if you...
Sure. I think you've summarized it well in terms of really the challenge of technology that can be posed. I think the hardware part of it is also one which will continue to be leveraged for a country like India. So I think that's going to be something that, as, again, trusted partners come together, how does that value chain evolve? And how do we build standards together which will be interoperable? Because I think that's one link where a lot of us are still trying to do our own thing. And that coming together will be equally important to the regulation of new technology. So I think it's really the old and new coming together for the next generation. I think education and agriculture, I would add to healthcare, where I think there would be multiple benefits in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Mehra. Over to you, Ms. Wibke.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can just, agree to what you said, right? Definitely, the health sector for us, again, is also quite a big topic where this technology advancements will be growing, definitely, for sure. And then again, but also, as you just mentioned, the whole education sector, and we had that also already before on the panel. It's going to be really also one of the challenges of our ability to grow this technology innovations is the question. And I guess, again, also that's something where we're all very united because none of our education systems is actually really prepared for the challenges lying ahead. I mean, looking again from a European perspective, we are looking sometimes towards Sweden, Finland, like the Scandinavian countries, and I guess probably they're a little bit more ready. But again, also looking at our own education system, and I guess in the universities we are quite able to, to adapt, and we've seen quite a quick adaptability also during the pandemic, and how. They're just implementing their classes and so on. But if you're looking at the primary education and so on, again, it's a huge challenge that's lying ahead. And again, I mean, we have seen quite some exciting developments over here in India when it comes to edtech, etc. So I also hope, honestly, that some of these developments that we've seen in India, we'll be also able to take it, globally, because I think there's been a lot happening on the ground that we could learn from.
Thank you. I think that's been a comprehensive account as we move towards the open session. We have some scheduled interventions before we move for Q&As. We have Professor Manan Suri from IIT Delhi. Professor, if you'd like to maybe intervene, ask a question. I'd also like to request the interventions to be limited to 90 seconds.
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Rohan. Thanks for the nice discussion. There's a very interesting trend that's happening here. Specifically with respect to the technologies, the global dialogue that's being initiated now, if you compare to some other precedences in defining technologies all across, whether it was nuclear or climate change, the onset of global dialogues happened for those technologies far later in the maturity cycle of the technologies. The countries started talking to each other much later when there was absolute dominance of certain technology initiators. But whether we talk about quantum or AI, the interesting thing that we are observing is that this conversation is beginning to happen much early in the maturity cycle of these technologies. So the good side is that it gives a ground that there is a more level playing field. But what I feel would make or break it from here will be how nuanced are the regulations or the standards between the so-called strategic partners. So any thoughts on that? We have wonderful initiatives specifically on bilateral side like the IndusX or ISET. But what kind of efforts are going to make sure that the standards or the regulation for the so-called strategic partners would be balanced enough for these things to thrive?
Yeah, if panelists would like to reflect. High Commissioner. And then I'll move to Ms. Mehra.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. So it's very interesting that one of the things that came out of the AI summit last week in the UK was the idea of having a report which looks at the sort of state of AI and looks to the future. And that's actually explicitly taken from the IPCC world, from the climate change world, to say, okay, well, we need somebody which can actually, a trusted body, which can actually present the landscape to us. So it's interesting how it's derived from that. Secondly, what's interesting about what's happening now is India is very much in at the start. Yeah? And that's probably even a change from 25 years ago. You can't have this conversation without India being one of the main countries of the world. So and I think that is a quite significant change, and I think a good one. Thirdly, there are different societal preferences. So the European Union is a naturally European, and I worked for the European Commission for, what the European Union does, amongst other things, is it makes laws. And there is no problem to which the European Union cannot solve it by making a law. And that's its preference. The UK now outside the European Union actually has a slightly different preference about how you regulate AI. What you can do, though, is to try and establish principles from which you then do your state interventions. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, really, is work out what are those principles which then guide the state, the actions of the state in relation to this area. So I don't necessarily see, I don't see a harmonization of law. You'll have different approaches, but I do think you have a sort of growing, consensus may be too strong a word, around the principles to guide your state interventions.
Yeah, I think Professor also spoke about Index X and ICID. So if Ms. Mehra, if you'd like to reflect on it.
And just sort of continuing in the same frame, if you look at India's digital protection bill, right, I think that's also taken key elements from Europe, from US, and it's come together in a way which then helps India project really what it's trying to do with its own ecosystem. Index X, which you mentioned, I think that's a little different. There is a lot of history with non-NATO allies. And really what we're trying to do with initiatives like Index X is work through some of the historical ITAR regulations, the export control regulations, and provide a pathway for innovative startups to break through that, right? So the governments are giving cover to ensure that innovative startups out of India don't get caught in that log jam, and there is that pathway for collaboration. So I think it's a very different example. We've tried it in many iterations before where we've not done as well. So it's really a test in progress, and hopefully, we're all very hopeful that we'll have better results this time. So it's a very realistic view that I'm giving you, but that's really where we are in the cycle on that.
Thank you, Ms. Mehra. I think we'd move to the next intervention. We have Ms. Namrata from Ikigai Law in the audience. If you could pass the mic, please.
Thank you for the session. That was very insightful. And my question is for the panel. So one thing that we did hear across the other panel, and also what Ms. Doffler did touch upon towards the end, is sustainability of technology, right? So my question is, how are policymakers thinking about their priorities when it comes to bringing about this global consensus on what technological development should look like, that not only focuses on this collaboration, but also answers hard questions about sustainability and responsible development? And just as a follow-up, do existing sort of sustainability goals match up given the pace of technological development, or is there a need to reevaluate even those considering how fast we are moving? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Doffler, if you would like to reflect upon that.
Okay, I hope I get the full question. It's a little bit a challenge from the acoustics. I mean, see, when we talk about Germany and it comes to these kind of regulations, again, of course, you know, it's basically a European level, or when it comes to, you know, these kind of challenges, it's definitely we are talking about the European level, and then it gets also pretty big. And again, for us, it's and I guess, you know, I might have quite a lot of experience also on that. It's quite a challenge looking at the diversity, again, also of the EU, to manage these challenges, because just our countries are very different in the way in the way they are set up. And I mean, just to look kind of at the policy side and so on, there are a lot of attempts to, you know, in Germany to bring these things together and to at the same time, you know, try and invest in again energy generation, technologies that are generating energy, which is kind of one of the major sources for the developments. And I think Germany has been also kind of on the forefront of that, on, you know, implementing windmills, etc., and doing quite some research on that. Nevertheless, I personally also believe that the kind of the technology developments might be much faster, as our regulatory ability to come along, and also then again our ability to create that infrastructure that will be able to provide these to provide kind of the background of these developments. So I guess we might need to look at our policies again and again and in shorter time spans, which again, of course, brings quite an administrative challenge along. And just speaking from our local perspective, it's definitely one of the things that we're focusing on a lot, and where we are, kind of trying to bring together the different perspectives. And I think, again, also that's something that in kind of a German context we've been quite good at, this kind of interdisciplinary approaches where you're working together from different angles. But definitely, I mean, the question that you posted, okay, do we need to revise also our the sustainability goals and so on? I guess so, yes, because it's the speed is just pretty fast that we are dealing with at the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Vipke. Abhishek ji, if you'd like to add.
I guess you asked about how technology can be sustainable and it can help addressing the SDGs, the goals also that we have. So while what we have been discussing so far is that the need for collaboration, the need of bringing consensus, the need of bringing approach in which we kind of leverage technology in such a way that we are able to use it for addressing the key challenges we face as a global community. And Professor Sood's presentation also mentioned some points around that. And the way to look at it is that how do we distinguish between what is good and what is user harm? And when we look at good, when we look at the whole global population, we find that millions of people across Asia, across Africa, they are not even having access to basic, say for example, healthcare or education, or challenges that the world is facing for climate change. How can we use technology to address these challenges that we are facing as a global community? And while doing so, how do we prevent any user harm, in the sense that how do we make more use of the more positive uses of technology in order to address these challenges? And how do we ensure, say for example, data privacy? How do we ensure that the ethics and the responsible development of artificial technology like artificial intelligence is done without any biases? So very often we have thought about like whenever any AI model is based, because of the data sets that are fed to train it, if the data set itself has got some biases with regard to gender or with regard to race or with regard to communities or with regard to diversity that we have in the society, the outcomes that the models will give will also be biased. So how do we be obvious of that, and how do we kind of design our algorithms in such a way that we can address that? And when we are able to do that, we'll be able to do deployment of technology in a much fairer, unbiased manner, which will help us using it for ensuring benefits to people at large across the world, so that if there's a village in Malawi who doesn't have access to a specialist doctor, there also they could get diagnosis done of breast cancer or of tuberculosis. That can be done. So that kind of approach is required when we design such AI-based system, to keeping the interest of the end user in mind. And if we do that and we design our systems on the basis of that, we'll largely be able to work out systems that will be more sustainable and that will be more adopted by most countries and by most people.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. I think we take the next scheduled intervention, Dr. Suresh from the center here in IISc.
Thanks, Rohan, and thanks to the panel for sharing the insights on such important matters. So we have a number of technologies beyond AI and digital technologies that are likely to shape our society and economies in the coming decades. These include things like space technology and synthetic biology and so on. What we are also seeing increasingly is technology innovations that are happening at the convergence of various emerging and disruptive technologies. For example, at the interface of AI and biotechnologies, you have a lot of different innovations coming up, and which would lead to, obviously, a different set of risks and a whole landscape of risk and opportunities of different kind. So, and also the policy process and regulation process for these kind of new innovations at the convergence of different technologies is often quite difficult. So what approach or strategies do you guys think would be best suited for international cooperation on such new innovations which are at the convergence of different technologies? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh. I'd just open it to the panelists, if anyone of you would like to reflect back on this.
I would say that largely what we have been discussing, the models that are existing, whether it's the GPay or whether it's the model of the Bletchley or the IPCC for the climate change that we have, or the International Atomic Energy Agency. So every time the world has faced with a challenge which is technological or which impacts all countries at one go, and it's not that it's a country specific problem. Whenever there is a global challenge that the global community has faced, the world has come out with several models, and many of them has worked well. So whether it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that kind of model, or the International Atomic Energy Agency's model for regulating the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, or the UK's initiative, the AI Safety Summit, which is addressing the issues related to safety, security, and therein they are not even only referring to AI, they have also referred to frontier technologies, and therein the interface between biotech and the interface between AI and other related technologies will also come in, because AI is not isolated. AI can impact every other gene design or creating new living beings, all of it will come in, or drug design, all of it come in. So the initiative that the UK took in and the kind of consent that is built in will go in the same direction. GPay conversations also in the same direction. So I think there are sufficient number of global models to address these challenges as and when they come in. So I would say that the same models will work to address the intersection of AI with biotechnology or any other sector that will may come in.
Yeah, High Commissioner.
I really agree with that answer. I guess the big issue is the contested nature of the world, and whether you can just have fundamentally different approaches to how you do this between different countries. And it's just much, much harder to create global consensus than it was 25 years ago. Excuse me for just using this as a way of raising an issue which I think is a very big one here, which is about understanding and trust. I have absolutely no understanding of quantum technology at all. I suspect I'm unusual in this room for being that way. I expect I am also usual in terms of the general population. So what do you do? Because these things are inherently political because they interact with almost everybody in some way. What do you do then? How do you create trust, not just between countries, but within a country? And there's lots of research about how that happens or doesn't happen. It comes down in large part to trusted figures, individuals or institutions which people are prepared to trust. Why are you prepared to trust a vaccine? What enables that trust to be established? And that comes down to a combination of processes and institutions and figures in whom trust resides. You saw that in COVID. It's interesting in different countries who was trusted, as it were, as a source of information. Not necessarily governments, I have to say. Very often not. So you're going to have to, with some of these frontier technologies, find the ways to create societal trust for them. And that, I think, is quite hard and is capable of enormous abuse. and also the difficulty where people don't trust things of convincing them once they've decided, and people decide, I decide, I'm afraid we all decide on the basis of ignorance, we reach conclusions which then are very hard to overturn, even if there are clear societal benefits from overturning those conclusions. So I think that is, if I may say, one of the things I would like all of us to think about is that, how are you going to establish trust about AI? Because at the moment, what you get on AI, for example, I've seen, is it Terminator 3? I can't remember which one, where you think, we're all going to die. Yeah? And how do you get beyond that and into, because fear is such a useful way of fear sells, yeah, basically, there's commercial value in it. How do you get beyond that into understanding and trust which enables the benefits in a way which is ethical? And I think that is a big, big challenge for societies over the next generation.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for that account. Now to open the floor for questions, I'd request you to please raise your hands and also limit the question to a statement or a question. Can we please pass the mic at the back?
Yeah, hello. My name is Reena Dayal. I'm the founder and CEO for the Quantum Ecosystems and Technology Council of India. And, when we talk about global technology competitiveness, and there was a conversation around the supply chain or the value chain as well, one of the things that bothers me, and I want to ask you whether it should, is that quantum is not at the forefront of conversations, and I think British High Commissioner Alex, you mentioned about that as well as to maybe a reason why it is not. But when I look forward and I look at the way this value chain is evolving, like all complex areas, it requires global collaboration, and the value chain is going to be spreading across nations. So is there a concerted effort which I'm missing, which should happen in defining what the structure of the resilient supply chains of the future for quantum should look like? Or is it just left to chance in the way, conversations are happening, collaborations are happening, and which part of the value chain is springing up in which part of the world? Because quantum is not just a complex technology, it has the power to change the future in many, many different ways. It can change the economic balance that we see across the world as well. So your thoughts on this, please.
Thank you, ma'am. High Commissioner, if you'd like to start.
Having just said, I'm probably the person in this room who least understands these technologies, So I think you're right. Quantum is going to change sort of everything, I think, because of its power, essentially. You can apply it to many different areas. And when I was working on our integrated review, our sort of review of our defense and security in the UK before I came here, it was one of the core technologies which we talked about. And so I think one of the issues on quantum, from what I saw and what I understood, was because it can touch on some of the most fundamental aspects of national security. Countries are quite cautious about engaging with each other about it. It's one of those areas where you do have to establish trust. You've just been in the United Kingdom doing exactly that. And so that's why I think there's quite a lot of caution, because certainly the sort of inside the national security part of the United Kingdom, people say, well, there are some bits which are extremely sensitive about quantum computing, not least its ability to unlock most forms of security. So I think you have to, but as I say, security is never 100 or 0. There's a whole series of steps between one and the other. And what you have to do is you have to start to explore what those safe steps are between countries, so you can create the greater trust. But I suspect that's why, even though it's such a powerful technology and will be so transformative, countries are pretty nervous. The nearer you get to the heart of national security, the more cautious countries get about talking to each other. And so you have to do a bit of work, as you are exactly doing, to increase that trust.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Ms. Mehra, if you'd like to add.
I think the one piece I'd add to that is about the skills, right? I think the one thing that India is already thinking about and doing is being future skill ready. And areas like quantum play into that, because as those value chains are developed, then there is a very strong proposition for India, given the trust factor, and then you add the demographic and the skill set that India brings on technology. I think that's a very powerful combination for India to focus on.
Thank you, Ms. Mehra. We'll take a couple of more questions. Could you please pass the mic to the table in the center?
Hello, this is Esther Swarna, Exit Technology, IHFC, IIT Delhi. And I take this moment to appreciate where India is leading with the n-dimensional factors involved in bringing up the platforms like the DPI and what all Dr. Sri Abhishek ji has mentioned. And I appreciate for leading all that, Abhishek ji. My question was, I also would like to add one thing besides AI and the DPIs that India is bringing in. One thing that we can be very proud of would be the CBDC and the blockchain-based digital currency that we have brought in, and really appreciate for all these technological advancements that are real and live and in the hands of the citizens of India in such a fast pace. It's already seen. But I have a question about this with you. Like, when can we do this CBDC like we do Paytm for Indian transactions in 1 second or less than a second? How can we? When are we doing this international transactions in 1 second?
Thank you for your comments. The CBDC, as you know, the RBI has notified the CBDC and they have started rolling out on a pilot basis. There are certain banks which have started offering it, and the challenge for wider adoption will be that at the last mile, also there has to be the provision for accepting that. And right now, in a way, the CBDC is competing with the UPI system that is there. And the UPI is much more simpler, much more easier to do. So as we go forward, when the entire infrastructure with regard to more merchants, more institutions willing to accept CBDC grows, the adoption of CBDC will also come in. With regard to making it useful for international transactions, that's something for which the central bank works with other banks. There was a partnership that was announced with Singapore when it was integrated with the Pay Now system. There are discussions which are going on with other countries in that, but there are a lot of issues other than technology is also involved. When it comes to financial transactions across nations' geographies, there are legal issues, there are regulatory issues, compliance issues which also come in. So I think the Reserve Bank of India will be pushing it, and it will come in sooner than later. And just like we are able to transfer a UPI transaction instantly between people here, a time will come when we'll be able to do that globally, but that will of course require not only technology, but more of integrating the regulatory and compliance issues into the technology framework. Yeah, so that would be very, very important, and then it will happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. I think we'll take couple of more questions.
I have one quick question and then I'll pass it on to Dr. Sanjeev. Maybe a devil's advocate question. We talk of international forums taking technology to the center stage, and then, I mean, all accounts were reflective of how it is getting more and more important to bring technological conversation to multilateral policy conversations as well. The thought that we saw both this year as well as that is emerging is, does it make absolute sense when we say countries, when they have technological leadership in a particular technology or an overall technology landscape, do they have an upper hand in global policy settings and standard setting, or do we really try to balance it out by saying it's an equitable conversation in multilateral? What is your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's...
You gave the answer. While we all aspire the world to be flat and equitable, but there are relative strengths every country, or in fact even in every individual has. So every country plays down to their strengths and advantages. So if we as a country are strong in, say, skills, tech skills, we will use that as a leverage when we do our negotiations. Similarly, if there is a country, if the UK has a strength in research, they will use it as a leverage. If US has a strength in, say, infrastructure or building technology or research, they will use as a leverage. So that's something which is given. But given that, you come across and try to bring on a common minimum denominator which works in the interest of everyone. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's like there are ways in which everyone benefits. So when you take negotiations in that direction, you are able to bring in consensus, come out with declarations, come out with roadmaps for moving forward.
I agree very much. I think that one of the big changes of the last 2 decades, which will continue, is the spreading, the diffusion of power in the world, and it's the reduction of its concentration. And that is leading to countries having to work together more. The second is, as I referred to, for the rise of China and its own particular, the view of the Chinese state to its relationship with the individual. So you have that fundamental competition which exists. And I use the United States as shorthand, but I could say the UK as well, just a different way of viewing the world, or indeed India for that matter. So there comes a point where you reach that point, Abhishek's point, where you say, okay, it's worth us doing this together. Just going back to the Covishield example, there is an example. In other words, the combination of research and skills, British research and Indian skills and manufacturing power leads to beneficial consequences. So you decide that you accept that there is a framework which sits above you, which is sufficiently important that you're prepared to cooperate within it. You're always going to compete as well. But no longer do you have a totally dominant United States. The United States is still the most powerful country in the world, still the most dynamic economy, I would say, in the world overall. But the need for cooperation between countries is very strong. But this is not inevitable. Yeah? Some countries really have choices about whether they do this or not. And what you try to do is create structures which are going to encourage you to go down the path of cooperation, even as you're going through competition. And I think that's what we are now trying to do on these frontier technologies, is how do you stimulate that framework? How do you stimulate that cooperation? Well, there'll always be competition by creating a framework which is sufficiently attractive to a sufficient number of countries that it has an impact.
Yeah, maybe if Ms. Mehra and Ms. Vipke would like to add quick comments.
So I think just, to add to that, if you look at the other frontiers like space even, right? There have been existing frameworks, but India has first time forayed into saying we will allow commercial companies to come into this space. So the pole is shifting constantly for both industry as well as for governments. And I think that's why it's a dynamic frame of reference in that sense. I think add to that the historical relationships between countries, right? A classic example that we constantly answer to is India and US versus India and Russia. Two very, very different partnerships. Both have been technology-led in many ways and continue to be that way. So I think that balance and individual relationships between countries will continue to be important, even though we come towards larger groups of countries working together on certain technology regulation issues.
Yeah. I mean, just to add another layer there is a lot of the policy making definitely is shaped also like on a country level by the interests of the industry, right? And I think we've seen examples of that also with regards to Germany in the past. Like, I mean, just let's talk about the automobile sector. It's one of the driving factors in our industry. So of course, you try to position yourself when it comes to certain technologies in trying to kind of get the pole position for yourself, but just as it was said also, we'll definitely see quite a shift in who is the kind of the driving factor for certain technologies in the future. And I definitely see like a power shift there also, towards the Asian countries. There's a lot of development happening here that we also, from a European perspective, have to, acknowledge and take into consideration, and actually also learn from it. So.
Thank you, Ms. Wiebke. We'll take one last question to the center table, please. Can we pass the mic here, please, in the center?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Sanjeev Srivastava from ISC Bangalore. I'm talking about, you people are talking about the strong skill sets and all those things. I would like to know from our Government of India representative, Abhishek ji, we divide our competency level like beginner, advanced, specialist, and professional. Nowadays, a lot of emerging technology are coming. Do we have any framework to decide which kind of skill set is required for this kind of competency, so that we can provide such kind of certification, and it should be industry accepted certifications? Thank you.
So,
in fact, a very, very relevant question, I must say. In fact, the accreditation framework which has come out, which has been published by the National Skill Development Corporation, the National Skill Certificate, NCVET, National Skill Vocational Center, which is there, Dr. Kalsi leads it. So they have come out with an accreditation framework for various kind of competencies for not only emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, but across the whole industry-wide skill sets and competencies that are required. And therein, every competency has been described at several levels with regard to at what level, what kind of person should have that skill set. And the same framework has now also been adopted by the University Grants Commission, so that even the academic curriculum will also map those competency and skill sets at the relevant levels. So what you do at an undergrad level, what you do at the postgrad level, and what you do at the research level will be defined. So that is the way it is being addressed. And if you look at the document, it will give you all the details. And that is very, very important when we especially look into trying to identify the right resource for the right persons. In fact, even in the government, in the other role that I have as the CEO of Karam Yogi Bharat, there also, even for the government functionaries, we are defining at what level a person should have what kind of competencies. So like, for example, if somebody is working in, say, Ministry of Commerce and do a lot of negotiations, he should know about trade policy, he should know about negotiations. So those competencies are also being tagged at various levels, and depending on where a person is in the hierarchy, he is required to acquire those competencies by undergoing training on those courses, which will give them that. So that's the way the whole framework is being envisaged by the Government of India.
thank you, sir. Ms. Wiebke,
Yeah, maybe I can just add on to this a little bit from an outside perspective, right? So when we look at our higher education system in Bavaria, or Germany in general, there's a huge focus on, teaching applied skills, like really making people ready for the workforce and not really having to have too much of time for the companies to invest in, but really have them work ready. And if I'm looking at, so I'm working with India now for 10 years, and if I look at the policy changes that has been done, I mean, all the development that Abhishek just mentioned, looking at the NEP and so on, it's actually pretty amazing, the paradigm shift that we see in the education sector here. And I think kind of, if you look at the policy side, it's all laid out. And I think it's also, and I mean, I'm aware there are quite a lot of people from the scientific field inside the room. I think it also is on the side of the educational institutions to actually, take this into, bring it into implementation. And I've never seen so much collaboration, between industry and academia in India before. There's really, really a lot happening there, and it's really been, supported, I think, from high levels, and just kind of the implementation level. I think the change is already happening, right? At least so from what we can observe. And for us, actually, it's a great opportunity also, because again, it's easier for us than to match it, with our education system, with our approaches towards applied sciences, etc.
Thank you, Ms. Wibke. I think we'll take one last question, since we also stand between the session and the lunch. What was the last year?
Thank you for all your points raised today. My name is Anshuman Iyengar, and I'm representing Innovate UK. My point is to do with the point raised by Ms. Jofle, and that is on the impact of industry on the shaping of policy. So I would like to ask, what role do you see in documents like industrial policies boding well or not well with science and technology policies of each of these countries, and whether or not it affects the competitiveness of the collaborations that happen?
Over to you, Mr. Fu.
Okay, can you just quickly? Okay, I'm not 100% sure whether I've got your question. So the question is on the policy making. Okay, can you just repeat it?
Sure, no problem. So I was wondering what sort of interplay that you see between industrial policies across governments and the science and technology policies that get published, and whether that would have a role in the competitiveness and eventually the trust of the stakeholders involved in the decisions and the usage of science and technology.
Okay, I mean, again, so the context I can talk of is the context, of the state of Bavaria there. We've actually seen quite, parallel developments also, where we are not only, changing our policies for industry, but also changing our policies when it comes to, higher education, and then also, again, science and technology. So, at least for our context, I can see that there is, quite a positive impact on each other, where also we are seeing that we are getting more flexibility in that whole science sector. That would probably normally, just apply to the industry, etc. So, kind of talking from that context where I come from, we see, quite a positive impact there on these policy changes. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Wibke. Ms. Mehra.
No, I'll just add to that. Obviously, the convergence of industrial policy and science and technology policy, I think that's the question you were asking. We're beginning to see that across different geographies. There is also the overlay of security, which is the reason why both of those are converging at many levels. If I look at just India, that's the area where we are advocating a lot. Their approach and openness really to inclusivity and taking all voices into account has tremendously opened up in the last decade, last 15 years. So really want to compliment the government on the openness and the approach to taking in voices of academia, startups, foreign industry, really having all voices at the table.
Thank you, Ms. Mehra. I think with this we come to and concluding the session. Thank you everyone for joining, and I thank all the panelists for their insightful remarks. I think this opens a lot of threads for further discussion, and we'll also be drafting a proceeding of this discussion that can be used by various stakeholders in the policy ecosystem. So thank you everyone, and we may proceed for the lunch now.